Hello, welcome back to Hunter Tune. Today we're going to be installing a FuelTech FT450 onto my Honda Grom. So I did buy a FT450 for the Grom because we got a really big motor in it now. We did install a really big motor and really big throttle body, and now I have a Honda Civic injector in it, which is like a 240cc. A stock Honda Grom injector is like a 120cc or 150. So we did install that. I got a big fuel line from Mike O'Connell. This engine was actually built by Mike O'Connell. He ported the head, he did a whole bunch of stuff to it. I changed to a Brock's performance exhaust over the Hindle, which I really like. It fits a lot better. The ground clearance is much better. I can actually lean this bike and scrape the peg now instead of the exhaust. Everything else in the motor, you guys probably saw in one of the last videos, I talked about it a little bit, but it's a beast of a 210. And I currently have the bike running on an A-Racer Mini 5, and the Mini 5 runs this bike okay once it's off idle, but idling and getting it to start up and stuff, there's not adjustment in the Mini 5 to get this radical of a setup to, you know, start up good and idle good. So that's why I'm switching to the FuelTech. Plus the FuelTech has a whole ton of options if I want to run nitrous on this engine or possibly turbocharge it, which I have plans for eventually in the future. You got your bone? Got my studded tires ready for the blue Grom. We're going to be taking that out on the ice soon. Probably make a video just talking about that as well. But here is the stuff that I bought for the Grom. This is the FuelTech FT450. And I'm going to try to make this short and simple because I tend to talk way too fucking much. But anyways, I bought an FT450. I bought the AFM, or like the Wideband nano controller that FuelTech sells. So I bought that, and I bought the FuelTech FT450, and I bought the plug-and-play Honda Grom harness. So this harness will plug right into the bike currently, and this harness will plug into the Wideband nano system, and then plug into the O2 sensor that I was already running with the Mini 5 A-Racer. So I just got a Junkyard LS ignition coil here. This is out of, I don't know, a Silverado. So I grabbed one of those from my shop. I have a whole row of them just in case this one's bad. And I also have a Walbro 255 fuel pump that I may throw in this bike eventually. I don't know if I'm going to do it right away, but I do plan on upgrading the fuel system even more on this bike. If you guys follow John Hendrick, he actually has a few videos on Facebook or on YouTube of doing the FT450 on his Grom, his turbo Grom. He has the highest horsepower Grom out there. All right, so we got the FuelTech FT450 with the plug-and-play Honda Grom harness and the Wideband nano harness. So this is the ECU and the dash. It's an FT4, it's all in one. So like, it's really cool. It's touchscreen just like the Holly, and the ECU is the dash on a FuelTech. So we're going to be replacing the stock Honda Grom dash, which I just removed from the bike. It was fairly easy. Just 3 screws that fit through here on the bike. This will sit on here like this. So there's a screw here, and a screw here, and then there's 2 other ones on the bottom as well. So there's a total of 5 screws that hold this on, and then you have a wiring harness that plugs into it, and then this piece, the headlight piece, I also took off, which is two bolts on the side here and 2 bolts on the other side, and then this thing you kind of can just wiggle off. Just like this, and then it has a wiring connection here for the headlight, which is up here. So I just unplugged that, and there's also a plug-in down here. And then this plug is for the cluster and the speedometer. So there's 3 total plugs here, 4 bolts, 5 screws, and you'll be to this point right here. So first things first is we're gonna try to mount the FuelTech FT450 dash onto the Grom. I have all the screws over here. So these are the 4 that go in the side, right there. And then this, all these little like self-tapper looking screws are the ones that held the cluster. And then these rubber mounts also sit with these screws to mount the gauge cluster. This piece right here is actually a piece of the cluster like holder. So over here on the bike, the only modification I've done so far to mount the FuelTech 450 is I cut this section of the cluster out. So I just took a multi-tool. You could take a die grinder or a Sawzall or something like that, and I just cut this little piece out because this piece actually interferes with the electrical plug-in for the ECU and the dash. It doesn't fit right here. So how I'm going to mount the FuelTech, they give you this little bracket piece which sits on the back of the FuelTech like this, and then they also give you these screws. So these bolts right here go on the outside into the FuelTech. You can see it's got brass inserts where it's threaded, and they supply these bolts which bolt to this piece right here. It's a little plastic mounting tool. I don't know if we're going to use this or not. We'll talk about that in a second, but the FuelTech has these bolts and then these plastic washers down here.
Am I not supposed to do this?
No, you are.
Is that too much of a close-up?
No, it's fine. Good job. And then this piece mounts to the bike, or how I think that's how they want you to do it, is they want you to mount this and then mount the FuelTech to this. But I don't know, like I said, if we're going to use this or not. So they give you 4 screws and 4 nuts all right here that you can mount this to your vehicle and then mount the FuelTech to this. So you can mount it with these screws and nuts, or you can use these like drywall screws that they give you that just thread into the plastic. Yeah, so you can either like thread it into the plastic or use the bolt and nut method. They give you either option. Well, I don't know if that's right or not, but yeah. So FuelTech is very simple. It just has an ECU plug-in right here, and it has a vacuum line for map sensor. It has a built-in like 7-bar map sensor or something crazy, and then it also has the USB here for doing changes, although the changes can be done also from the touchscreen. So like I said, we're going to try to mount this guy first onto the bike, and how I did this is I just took the FuelTech dash and I placed it pretty much where the factory Grom cluster was, and it mounts almost perfectly onto the Grom cluster, like, you know, piece here. And I cut this little chunk out to fit the ECU plug right here. So that sits in here now, and I'll actually be able to plug in the wiring harness. You can see how that was interfering before. So now all I have to do is mark some holes where this is going to sit, and I'll have at least the 2 lower bolts on the FuelTech will line up with the Grom gauge piece here. So that's probably all I'm going to do for now, is I'm going to drill a hole here and drill a hole here to mount the FuelTech, and then I'm going to be able to run the map sensor lead right through the top Grom cluster mount. So a Grom cluster mounted here, here, and here, these 3 holes that are already in this. The top one mounts the map sensor hole almost perfectly, so I can still fit my vacuum line through here. So this is how it looks from the top, kind of just sitting on there. I got my helper out here today. My future wife. We're engaged now. Yay.
It's 2:30 in the morning.
It's 2:30 in the morning.
Pajamas.
Yeah. So the FuelTech here is going to sit something like that, and I'm just going to mount it onto the Grom, you know, stock Grom cluster thing right there. So I'm going to drill some holes, get this mounted, and then I will move on to figuring out the rest of this. But I think that's going to be one of the tasks that I have to do. Then we can move on to the wiring harness and feeding that through the bike and figuring out where that wants to go. And then we also have an owner's manual and stuff. If we ever get stumped here, we'll probably refer to that. And then we have an LS ignition coil that we're also going to be using on the bike, because you cannot use the factory Grom coil. You have to use the FuelTech Smart Coil, or, you know, an equivalent like an LS coil. Also need a beer. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so I got 2 additional holes drilled into the factory mount here. They ended up being pretty much right below the original ones. So I got those drilled out. I wallowed them out a little bit because I only got 1 drill bit size here. So I got the holes drilled and I actually had to file down here a little bit more. I just took a hand file and filed this down a little bit farther because the ECU plug was still interfering with some of this. So got that all filed down, got the 2 bolt holes drilled. What I did is I actually just took the FuelTech and I just wiped a little bit of grease around the bolt hole, and then I set it on there where I wanted it, and then the grease told me where to drill the bolt. So now I'm going to bolt this on for good, and I'm going to mount it on here, and then I'll pick up to you guys in a second when I get that mounted to the cluster mount. And I think I'm just going to mount it direct, because if I were to use this piece, there's not really a lot of locations to bolt or to mount it. So like, I could do it like this, but I'm just gonna run it straight on there. I know it's probably not good with vibrations and stuff like that, but I think it'll be all right. All right guys, so I got the FuelTech ECU/dash mounted onto the bike. So you can see here, it actually fits really well on the Grom, at least on the SF model. This is the year 2016 to 2020. So I just put this headlight piece on here to make sure I have clearance for all the wiring and stuff like that, which I do have plenty of it. This is just setting on here right now, it's not bolted on. And I was taking the wiring harness and just making sure that it fits through where I need it to fit. And then I took this carbon fiber piece off of my stock cluster. I bought this from Taiga, Japan, and this just fits over, and it's like a little mini carbon fiber windscreen. I took this off, and I'm gonna try to somehow integrate it onto the bike like this. I don't know how I'm going to attach it yet, but I would like to be able to mount this back on here just because I like the way it looks, and it covers up a lot of the stuff on the front end. So I'm gonna try to figure that out. I also have to somehow mount the wideband. So this is the FuelTech Nano wideband, and I'm probably just going to set it on top here with, I don't know, I might make a bracket from the back bolts on the ECU to screw into the back of the Nano, or I might just double side tape it temporarily to see, you know, how strong it'll stay there or whatever. But I think I would like to mount it up top like this, so it sits right above the ECU. Another option was to mount it off on the bar somewhere like this, but then I would have to make a bar clamp to bracket adapter, and then I would have wires running. I'd have wiring running out here, which I don't really want to do. I'd rather kind of keep the wiring all in the nose here. So if I mount this here, the wiring can sneak right through this hole and run to wherever it needs to run under the bike. So that's probably what I'm going to do. Like I said, I was running a phone mount right here to tune with my A-Racer. I just had a phone mount and I tuned everything on my cell phone right here. But like I said, I don't really want any wiring running off into the distance that you're gonna see. I wanna try to keep this bike as clean as possible. So I'm gonna try to figure out a way to mount this on top somehow. I can't mount it below because it'll interfere with the key. There's nowhere really to mount it down here. I mean, maybe I could somehow mount it down here, but I don't really want it to interfere with the key. So, and I want the wideband to be the most visible thing in my line of sight. So you can see here, I got the access to the map sensor. The FuelTech is bolted to the 2 bottom bolts on the ECU, and I used some plastic bushing style washers to bolt it on. And this thing is solid. It's not going anywhere. Compared to like a stock Grom cluster, this thing is wobbly as shit. So I think it will be fine as long as the vibration does not damage anything inside the ECU, which is why I used those plastic washers in there. Hopefully the plastic washers will dampen some vibration. I think that's the reason they send you this plastic mount, so this can take the vibration instead of the ECU. But I'm just gonna hope that these little washers take out the vibration I need and won't damage anything in the ECU. Moving on, I really don't even know what I'm doing when I'm installing this FuelTech. I'm kind of going into this blind, so I might do some research tonight and come back out here tomorrow and figure out what to do from here. I know I have to hook up the harness. This is the engine harness. And then they give you this little pigtail, which is 3 wires, almost looks like throttle position or something like that. And then it has red, gray, and black wires. Not sure what this is for. I'm sure I will know by the time you guys see this video, but I don't know what it is for now. And then this is the ECU plug. This is gonna plug in, and then this harness is gonna run back to the factory ECU plug, which is on the bike behind this side fairing. So I'll have to pull this side fairing off to get at the ECU, and then I should be able to plug that harness right in. And then I believe, I'm not 100% sure on this stuff, I'm still kind of researching and figuring stuff out, but I think this white wire is for the gas gauge. I'm not sure. And then this white and yellow with the plug goes to the wideband harness. So I probably have to plug that in, and then we have to wire the coil. And then everything else should be fairly plug and play. They use that harness so you can still use the factory, you know, all the other factory wiring on the bike. Like the injector, the throttle position sensor, the idle air control. Actually, the idle air control does not work with the FuelTech. So if you have an idle air control valve still on your Grom, you won't be able to utilize that. And then that harness utilizes the stock crank sensor and all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna do some more research tonight, and then I'll hopefully pick up with you guys again tomorrow once I have a little bit more knowledge on what I need to do to make this all work. Alright guys, next I'm going to be taking all the plastics off of the bike. I'm going to be taking this headlight off again, the side fairings, the rear, then I'm going to get the battery removed and all of my stuff from my A-Racer, the Mini 5 and the wideband module. I'll be taking all that out, and once I get the plastics and all that stuff removed, I'll catch back up with you guys and we'll get to installing the FuelTech engine harness. If you guys want to know how to remove the plastics from your Honda Grom, refer to my engine removal video, and I showed how to remove the plastics on there. So I'm going to skip over that and just focus on the FuelTech stuff. Alrighty guys, I got the plastics off of the bike, and I actually finally just removed this evap canister that comes from the gas tank on the bike. I can't believe I haven't gotten rid of that sooner, but I got rid of this and the line that goes back. This just vents the tank, but I'm just gonna leave these open to atmosphere for now so we can ditch some of the stuff that was in here. Believe it or not, this is a whole lot more open now compared to what was in here. I had so many wires and stuff bundled up in here from the A-Racer that my side plastic on this side I kind of had to force on because of all the wiring for the A-Racer. So there was this in there, and then all of this is for the A-Racer. So like it has a splitter harness, it has the wideband module with a ton of wiring that I bundled up and tried to just cram in there, which I did, and it worked good. This ECU is actually really good. I like it, but I'm going to be selling off this old A-Racer ECU and wideband. And the FuelTech should be a lot cleaner and not as much wiring running around. So pretty much next what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this is where the ECU normally plugs in, and then this is the mount for the ECU. So I'm going to try to tuck this bracket up in there a little bit, and then I'm going to tie the harness to it like this, and then run the wiring harness up on the frame and then up to the FuelTech. So that's what I'm going to do next. It's just this guy right here. Pretty simple. I don't assume this is going to be too difficult. So this just plugs in. Just like that. That was easy. And then we can tie this up. And they definitely give you way too much harness. It does not need this much harness. So I'll have to get creative with tying this. Probably just double it up onto itself. Something like this, you know, over top like that to shorten it up. And then I'll zip tie the excess onto the frame, and then I'll plug this up into the FuelTech. And I'll pick up with you when I'm done. There's the engine harness all wrapped up. All the excess is looped over itself, and I got it installed. Ran it right through there and then up to the FuelTech. So that's all plugged in. Next, I just zip tied the wideband on here for now, and I'm running the wiring to kind of figure out where I got to put a lot of this stuff at. And off of the engine harness, you have this yellow and white, and then you have a yellow and white here. This end is capped off on the wideband nano harness, and I just plugged that in. So then I'm going to have to zip tie all this excess up under the dash. And then this is some wiring that I have to figure out. And then there's another section of the wideband harness that goes back, that I'm feeding back through the frame right now. And that plugs into my O2 sensor. Unfortunately, the FuelTech, at least this one, uses the 4.2 Bosch sensor, which I don't really like the 4.2. I've already killed 2 of them on this bike. I'm hoping this thing will survive for a while, but yeah, anyways, 4.2 sensor, only thing I don't like so far. But and you need to use their controller, which kind of sucks, but I don't know if you need to, but I opted to get their wideband. So I'm going to zip tie all this excess up on the frame on this side. And I also removed the factory ignition coil. So there's a bolt here and a bolt here, and this is the factory ignition coil. And then we have 2 wires going to the factory ignition coil that I have to figure out, because we're not going to be running the factory coil anymore. So yeah, that's how far I am right now, guys. I'm going to let you know when I get a lot of this stuff buttoned up and figure out what I got to do with a lot of this wiring. All right, guys, so I just got some more done on the Grom. I discovered a wiring diagram on Google of the stock gauge cluster wiring, and the white wire that comes off the FuelTech harness, I ran to the white and red on the factory gauge cluster wire. So I just tied that in. So that's for the speed input, supposedly. I know John Hendrick, he's been helping me along with this, and I can't thank him enough for having experience running a FuelTech on a Grom. So he told me that the white wire to the white and red like this on his, he still had to run power to the speed sensor. So down here there's power, ground, and signal for the speed sensor, which is this sensor right here. And I'm just going to try it as is. He told me to just maybe give it a shot and see if FuelTech harness has changed in any way. So we just ran the white wire like that. And next is the coil, and that's all we should need to get this thing to fire up, at least once I get a base map in it at least. The wideband nano wiring I still have to do, and I still have to wire the coil. So the coil wiring over here, there's a pink wire coming off the bike, and there is a black and white wire. So one of these is a ground, and one of these is a hot and signal. So the signal is going to go to one of the wires on the LS coil, and then there's 2 grounds. I don't know exactly what ones are what, but there's 2 grounds on the LS coil, and then there's a signal, or a 12 volt. So we have to get a 12 volt with a relay from the battery and switched power. So I have a 30 amp 12 volt relay right here, and we are going to wire in 12 volt switched power to the relay to turn the coil on, and then use the pink lead off the bike to trigger the relay, I think, or to trigger the coil. And then the other one is going to be our grounds. So I might try to tie both grounds into the factory one here. I don't know if that's going to work or if it's a bad idea. The FuelTech, they actually give you this wiring right here for a coil. So if you buy the coil from FuelTech, you can run this harness right here, and what it is this lead will plug into the pink wire on the bike, this lead will plug into the black wire on the bike, and then this one goes to chassis ground. So I'm opting to use an LS coil just because I have 100 of these things and they don't fail, so I figured why not try to make it work on a Grom. I think it'd be silly. So I'm gonna look up some diagrams here and try to get this coil wired in with this little relay that I have. And then when I get that finished up, I will pick up with you guys and probably put the battery back in the bike and see if the FuelTech powers up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it running, but I at least want to power it up tonight and maybe, I don't know, get the map off of it or see what we need to do to put a map in this thing to get it to fire. Another thing that I did already to the bike is these spark plugs. They are at least on the 4-valve head, they are an NGK ER9EH. And they have a threaded portion on the top. So when you use an LS coil, or pretty much any like normal spark plug wire, you need to have one of these threaded caps installed. So I got this cap off of like a random ass Autolite spark plug that I found at Walmart, and I just threaded it on to the existing spark plug that's in here, so we can run a LS coil and spark plug wire. So this spark plug wire is for a Chevy Silverado. It's just like a cheap eBay one, but this now clicks onto the spark plug. You can hear it click on, and then this will go to the coil instead of the factory wire, which is built into the factory coil. So you cannot reuse this, and you cannot reuse the wire. You may be able to reuse the spark plug boot and this end, which would go on without the threaded portion on the spark plug, but then you would have to cut this off and build a custom spark plug wire with this boot. So I'm going to opt out of this completely so I can just keep this as a spare for my other Grom that still uses the factory coil, and we're going to use an LS spark plug wire. This is also way thicker. It is just like a cheap wire, but I think it'll still be better than what was in there. So that's another thing that I did, and I wanted to let you guys know about. Alright guys, so I got the LS coil mounted in the factory location with one bolt. This would probably fit both location stock bolts because it's the same diameter across on the LS coil as the factory Grom coil, but you would need like a spacer or something in between. So what I did for now is I just put one of the bolts in, and then I just twisted it kind of where I wanted it and bent the bracket to fit this spark plug wire, and now it's all hooked up. And I'm starting to wire the coil, and I'm going off of this diagram right here, which pretty much says the far left is your switched 12 volt ignition power, the next wire in is the ECU signal, and then the ECU ground. So I have this wire, which is the first of the two on the left side, going to the ECU signal, power, and then I have the next wire going to the ECU ground, which is the black wire that would normally go to the coil. And then this wire on the far right, which is black on this harness, would go to the chassis ground. I think I'm going to ground it to the cylinder head up here, close to the spark plug, because the FuelTech diagram says that you're supposed to ground it to cylinder head, spark wire ground. So sometimes those grounds actually go like on the spark plug themselves, but I'm going to ground it on the cylinder head up here where there's an extra bolt that would normally hold the wiring harness for the stock O2 sensor. So I'm going to go to that with this black wire, and then this wire I have to build the relay with switched power from battery going to this. So I'm going to find a switched 12 volt power on the bike somewhere, hopefully back here by the fuse box somewhere. Hopefully I can find something. And then that will trigger the relay to turn on to send direct battery power to the coil. So once I get those things done, I think we should be good. I'm hoping. So I'm going to try this out, see how far I get, and I'll let you guys know. Alrighty, so I got the coil wired in, I hope. I don't know if it's right or not, but yeah, kind of talked about it. The leads on here on the LS coil, one goes to the power coming off of the relay. So wiring the relay, you have 30 and 87, which 30 is going to be the battery power, which switches on to 87. So when the relay clicks on, it sends battery power right to the coil. And then the other ones, 86 and 85, are power and ground. I don't think it really matters what direction power and ground goes to, but I got a switched power and ground from my taillight wiring right here I tied into. So now we have the wiring for power and ground going to here, and it's all good to go, I think. I have my battery installed again. I got the constant power off of the positive lead on the battery, and I just cleaned it all up and tucked it back away. So this is all wired and ready to go, I think. So I'm going to, when I turn the key forward on the bike, FuelTech powers up and it says blank file map. Do you want to run the configuration wizard? So this is the first time I've ever used FuelTech in general. I do have a laptop with the FuelTech manager software on it, but I think I might just try to run the wizard here and see what it's about. Like I said, I've never done this, and this is truly the first time I've ever even powered this FuelTech up. So I'm going to take this protection off of here. I'm going to have to look up the crank signal here and see what I got to set up here. Might be easier just to go through the laptop because this seems a little one crank or two cam. I feel like it's got one signal for the crank. Like 24-1 is LS Gen 3, which is this option here. I know that much. Yeah, I don't know if it's single crank and two cam or what. So I'm gonna have to look this up quick. Alright guys, so I got the FuelTech installed, I think. I might have messed something up, I'm not really sure. But I don't have any spark and the fuel pump is not priming. So when I plugged all this stuff in, like the only additional wire that it gave me was the speed sensor. So I plugged that in and then wired the coil how I think it needs to be wired with the relay, how the instructions tell me. And I turn the key forward, it gives me the startup option, the startup wizard. I ran through it, just kind of guessing on some stuff because I don't know what crank trigger this thing has. And Google doesn't really help me on that. So, not really sure. I just kind of ran through it to see if when I turned it off it would save, and it did save the changes I made. But when I turn the key back on, the fuel pump doesn't prime or anything like that. And when I crank the bike over with a spark plug on the end of the spark plug wire, it does not have any spark. Although it does have RPM signal on the dash, and it's way off. Like when I crank the bike over, it says I'm running 6,000 RPM, which I know is wrong. So yeah, and it's not sending any fuel in either. So something's up. I gotta see if I can get a base map for this thing, because I don't know if I have the brain to figure it out on my own. I mean, I'm sure I do, I just gotta figure it out. I gotta figure out what kind of crank trigger this has, if it's a rising or falling edge on the whatever, if it's sequential ignition, I don't know. It's a coil on plug deal, but yeah. So anyways, hopefully this helps somebody getting their feet wet, at least getting the ECU mounted and the wiring installed. I mean, really, I didn't wire much. I just wired a relay with battery power to the coil with a relay, and then tapped into the factory stuff. So I don't know. Hopefully I'll get a little farther on it tomorrow, figuring out what else I have to do. Okay, so it's been a couple days and I have figured out a lot more with the FuelTech. And the reason I did not have any spark initially was because I grounded the one wire on the LS coil to the ground on the bike, the black and white wire that was coming off the factory coil. I wired one of the grounds to there, and then I ran one of the grounds to the cylinder head. That was wrong. I ran both of the grounds straight to the battery, and then I had spark. So you can't just do what I did. It did not work. I ran both grounds on the LS coil right to the battery, the signal from the bike, and then 12 volt power from the relay. Once that was done, I had spark. I turned the key forward, I still didn't have a fuel pump, and my tach was way off. So John actually sent me a base file that you can get from FuelTech. So if I would have emailed FuelTech, they would have sent me the Grom base file. Once I uploaded the Grom base file, I had proper tach output, but I did not have working temp sensors. So like the engine temperature sensor wasn't working and the intake temperature sensor was not working. The TPS was functioning, I had spark, and I had injector pulse. So I went through, calibrated the TPS, and I got the temperature sensors working, but to get the temperature sensors working, I had to run an additional ground to the engine off of the ground wires on the sensors. So the intake air temp sensor has a white and blue. Sorry if you can't see this. They have a white and blue, and on the other side, it's a green and something. The green wire on the temperature sensors on this bike is the ground side. So the engine temp sensor has a green and a yellow down in here. There's a green wire and a yellow wire. The yellow wire, the signal to the ECU is ran through the harness they give you. The ground off of the temp sensor I tapped into, which is the green wire. So I ran off of the green wire, ran it over to the green wire on the intake sensor, and I tied both of them in and grounded it right to the clutch cover here. And now I have working temperature sensors, I have working everything on the bike. So that's awesome. I also got the Wideband nano harness wired in, so the wideband's working now. I ran, I don't even know here, plugged this in, obviously, the CAN adapter deal, plugged that in, and then the 3 or 4 wires coming off of the, this is the harness right here, coming off of the Wideband nano. It's got the 4 wires, it's got a red, a black, a yellow, and another black. So in the instructions here, you have a black and white wire that goes to chassis engine ground, and then you have a black solid, which goes to battery negative. So I did the black and white wire to the engine. So my chassis ground here, I did not use the wire going on the cylinder head here just because I didn't like the way the wiring was being routed that way. So I just went to the clutch cover over here. I might change the ground location at some point, but one of them, the black and white, had to go to the engine, and then the black solid goes directly to the battery. The yellow and red wire that is in the nano harness, which is pin number 5, is an analog output. So like if we were running another wideband controller somewhere or another wideband gauge, that's what that would go to. And then the red, solid red, went to switch 12 volt power. So I just tapped into another lead on the back of the bike here that was switch 12 volt. And that's what this red wire is. So now everything is working, and I got that base file from John. I can't thank him enough, and I just tweaked some stuff here and there. Just little stuff like injector size and some priming pulse and stuff like that, because this bike is not stock. It's a 240cc injector, and it's on E85 and stuff like that. So I still have a lot of tuning to do with this thing, and I plan to maybe make videos with the FuelTech Manager software, getting the base map set up. But out of the box, if you had the nano working, you go in and you change the closed loop parameters to adjust up to 50% is what I did, instead of the factory output. It turns on at 140 degrees and then turns off, or it doesn't have closed loop feature below that. And this tune is still pretty far off. It's not really that close at all, but I did get it running, and I'll try to start it up here for you guys. Put the bike back down on the ground. I don't know how much battery voltage I have, so it might not even start, but once I got that Grom base map in here, because the base map you need to get for the bike, or you need to set it up, because when you configure the map on these FuelTechs, it configures what wire is doing what on the back of the cluster. So you got to have that stuff set up. I've done some things on here already, like set up my temperature, configure the dash a little bit more. I'm going to play around with this some more, but it also has an odometer. I'm going to put a gas gauge on here and some other stuff. All that is to come, but this is just kind of getting me running. I have this set up for reading air, fuel, and gasoline scale, so like any normal wideband. And yeah, we'll see if she fires up. So as you guys can see from the clips on my phone, I got to get the battery charged on this thing, but I did show some videos of it starting and running. If you guys want to see anything else with the FuelTech stuff, I will make some videos on, maybe setting up the base map and getting this thing tuned in. But for the most part, it's all installed, and just now is, I'm going to make a bracket to mount the nano. I still have to do that, and then I'm going to wire the gas gauge and some other small stuff, which I may make a video on if you guys are interested. And yeah, and then obviously just tuning. So that's going to be next. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Hopefully this helps somebody. I know the FuelTech stuff is kind of up and coming, and I would love to maybe put one on a car. Maybe like the Integra with the K-series in it, or maybe do something else. I would like to maybe put a FuelTech in a car. I think that'd be cool. To get some more experience with it. Maybe you guys should let FuelTech sponsor me. That would be cool, because building hot rods and bikes and stuff like that, it ain't cheap. So save up your pennies, buy the FuelTech. I think it's awesome, and expect to do a little bit of wiring here and there, even with the harness that they give you. But for the most part, I'm pretty stoked, and I can't wait to get this thing finished and up and riding, and then do some changes. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention too is I'm running this bike TPS based, and I'm not using the map sensor. I'm just using TPS versus RPM for the fuel. You have the option to run map sensor or TPS. So I may run the map sensor later if we do a turbo. So I'm excited to maybe start that project at some point. We'll see. So thanks for watching the video, guys. I really enjoy working on this thing, and I enjoyed putting this FuelTech in, and I hope it helps somebody, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Blah blah blah, long fucking winded. Leave a like if you made it to the end, and comment what you guys think. Have a great night, and better tomorrow.